Today's episode was recorded live inside the Charles Hayden Planetarium at the Museum of Science in Boston, Massachusetts on June 10th, 2024. This event was produced in collaboration with the museum's Center for Space Sciences and was also made possible in part by a grant from the Simons Foundation. Please be sure to check out our other episodes, including one with Sia on the science of psychological attachment. If you've not yet done so, please give us a review and some stars on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening.
If we try to watch someone actually fall into the black hole, we watch their clock stop. It would actually reach an infinite mismatch between what we see and what they see. Now, it's important to say their personal clock didn't stop. They fall in, they didn't hit a brick wall, they didn't bump their head. They fall in a black hole. You'll never hear from them again. You'll never see them again. You'll never get another report from them. And the last report you get will take an infinite amount of time to reach you. So we lose the ability to track what happens to them or anything else that falls in. And again, this is the notion.
You got this notion that time's gonna stop. The winds are gonna change until you what you're not. But everybody's only told you what you're not. And you heard too much.
Welcome to Sing for Science, the show where musicians and scientists talk about music and science. I'm your host, Matt White. Each week we'll talk about a song by our guest artist and how it connects with our guest scientist's area of expertise. Today we'll be speaking with Bleacher's frontman and 11-time Grammy winner Jack Antonoff. Jack's been at the helm producing some of today's biggest records for artists like Taylor Swift, Lana Del Rey, and many more. The final track on Jack's latest Bleacher's album is called The Waiter, and on it he sings about the notion that time is gonna stop, and also that time is on a slip, hinting at the subjectivity of time perception. Also joining us is MIT theoretical physicist and history of science professor, Dr. David Kaiser. Dr. Kaiser is the author of several award-winning books about modern physics, including How the Hippies Saved Physics and his latest, Quantum Legacies, Dispatches from an Uncertain World. It is through the lens of quantum mechanics and Einstein's theory of relativity that many of our most basic intuitions about time and reality itself are completely upended. So today, with the aid of theoretical physics and under David's guidance, we hope to gain some understanding of how time can speed up, slow down, or even stop. The title of today's episode on the podcast is The Waiter, Observing the Dynamic Properties of Time with Physics. Museum of Science, please help me welcome to the stage Jack Antonoff and Dr. David Kaiser.
Hey.
All right. We're all here. So the format of this thing is that we usually talk a little bit about music before we get into the science. So one of the first things, Jack, that I noticed about this song is I heard a real symmetry between the words and the music. Like it's the only track on the album that doesn't have a strong rhythmic pulse to it, and so it kind of has this ethereal sound, and similarly the lyrics kind of have this abstract quality. So I'm curious, in your role as producer, do you set out to try and get the music to help get across what the lyrics are saying and match them accordingly like that?
Sometimes. And this one, it was like, I started, when I was writing out the lyrics, there was a lot of ocean, ship, just imagery, and then there's like, it's not a French horn, it's actually a saxophone, but at the very end, it sounds like, it just sounds like you're on the water. And then I started to back up from there, and the keyboard is a Juno 6, which has a chorus effect on it, which goes, has this like sound. So there's this weird out of time kind of just like movement back and forth. But I did record the song to a click, which I actually think makes it more interesting that it is on time, but then I'm playing out of time. Because if you're just out of time, then you're out of time. But if you're playing to a beat, but then you choose to, be really lazy with the vocal or really ahead, then you're showing people that in a different way. So it's hypnotic because it never leaves a perfect grid of whatever beats per minute that is. But then all the people playing on it are in space.
Yeah.
Like us.
Exactly. Right now, yeah. Well, we are here to talk about time in the mysterious way that we perceive it. And I think so much can be said about how that manifests in music. Like, for example, you can hear a song one day and it feels fast, and you hear the same recording the next day and it feels slow.
Yeah, so like a year. It feels fast or slow. And as you get older, you have different, some feel slower or faster.
So that's been your experience as you get older?
I think it's most people's, right?
Which direction does it go?
Faster? Like, okay, I was talking to my therapist about this, the way she explained it, which I liked, was like, if you walk somewhere, the walk home is shorter.
Yeah.
So that was how she explained time moving faster as you get older.
So it's almost like a relative experience, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Here's one question I've been aching to ask you. Why is it in pop music you'll often hear a key change to help lift a song, but you rarely, if ever, hear a tempo change?
Tempo changes are really hard. So a key change is, I think people think of them as this like strange choice, but they're actually not. It's very easy to make a key change. It's always easy to jump a full semitone or whatever it is, or two rather. If you're in C, it's just, you could just play the chorus in D as soon as it hits on the one. It's going to feel pretty cool. There's more interesting key changes that can happen, but there's always like a set of chords that can get you nicely into a key change or a way to do it. A tempo change is really hard. So what you'll hear often is like, sometimes there'll be like a total like switch up on something, and it's messing with your head. Sometimes as a song goes on, if it ever feels like it drags, like just push it up really slightly, like half a BPM on chorus 1, half a BPM on chorus 2, just let it rise. But for the most part, and I find this with a lot of art forms, like these like really like absurd ways of doing something that no one's ever done before. Like what if this song went here in this tempo? You find yourself sometimes sacrificing the part that is more important. Right. I think we go through this with like the way a lot of people have like tried to redefine releasing music. Like we keep finding ourselves back at, well, do I like the album? Do I like the song? I think we are cresting past this in film. Like for a while it was like there's 10-minute episodes every 3 seconds, and then you put and now it's just sort of like, did I like the movie? And so I think a lot about like, I always start when I'm at the beginning of an album thinking, oh, I'll do this, I'll play this, I'll do the first ever physical fade out where I'll hold a speaker and walk away from a microphone. Like you have all these like absurd ideas, and then you get there and you realize that you're doing something way bigger, and some of these like fun, flip the tempo this way and that and crazy stuff, you kind of feels like sophomoric by the time you hear the song. You just want it to be protected. Another question I want to ask you, you'd mentioned BPM. Do you have a tempo that you use most, or that is kind of your default? There's something about like the 110-ish area, which can like read in different ways. Like it can be like something that like you could theoretically dance to, or it could be pretty sad, but not really. I usually just sort of play and then tap it out. Like for example, there's a Bleachers song called Wild Heart, which I think the tempo is like 156.7843. Just because it was living around this arpeggiating sound that was coming out of like pretty much this like toy thing that I think I got at a science center somewhere, but I was just like, that's it. And so then that became the tempo. So it's usually like a tapped out version of whatever someone or I'm playing is. Also, like there's much less tempo than people think. 50 is basically the same as 100. So I find, you're pushing and pulling one way, and the further you get from another tempo, in a way, the closer you get to it being double time. So there's not really a tempo that really gets me going specifically.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned dance, and this is not totally on topic, but I think it is worth mentioning. I had Sheila E. on, the great drummer and Prince collaborator, and she was on with, we had a neuroscientist who studies rhythm processing in the brain. And he explained to us that the way our brain processes rhythm is in the motor cortex. So in order to process rhythm, we have to imagine movement or actually enact it. And furthermore, what was really crazy is it talks about beat synchrony. So like you're clapping, and if I lock in with you, the brain floods the motor cortex with dopamine, which is why it feels good to like lock in on a beat and feels really horrible when you don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's also interesting where it comes from. Like in my time, I kind of like diagnosed it like either shoulders or hips is really the two places you would feel it. Like everyone taps their toes, everyone moves their hands, everyone nods their heads, but like there's shoulder music and there's like hip music, and you could imagine which is which. And so my music is usually come from the shoulders. Typically, female music is more interesting from the hips, and I think typically male music coming from the hips can be a little bit grosser, like, right?
It's just too much.
Yeah. So like where, and then you get the rare both, which I guess is Sheila E. Going to both. Did you watch the We Are the World documentary?
Oh yeah.
The Sheila E. part where she was like, "Oh, I'm only here because you want Prince. Fuck this." Yeah, I liked that. It made me like Sheila E. even more than they already. And who got really? Al Jarreau got really. Who's?
I don't remember.
Someone got really.
Al Jarreau left. Oh
No.
yeah, someone did get shit-faced.
Yeah.
I forget who it was. Okay, now to the main event. Can we talk about these two lyrics? We're talking about, just a brief refresher for all of you. We talk about the notion that time's going to stop and also that it's on a slip. So if you would be so kind, could you please expand on those?
So the perspective of the song that I was thinking about was like one of feeling unseen, right? And I think the feeling of feeling unseen makes time feel like slow or fast. Like if you're at somewhere where there's like, if you think about like panic in the face of social, right? You're rarely experiencing it in real time. It's either like, feels like 1,000 years, or it feels like a sweaty, sped up thing. You can't really clock what people are saying. And so this one, I think actually the main perspective was a bit more of like a dissociative place, which makes time feel very slow to me. That's a bad place to be. It's my least favorite place to be because it draws into question about reality. So my personal least favorite place to be. Why I really dislike hallucinogenics or anything like that. I really don't like questioning reality. Some people do. But when I'm there, I don't feel time necessarily. And so the main point of the song is kind of you're off in your own little shell, and you feeling unseen. You've when has the world seen you for what you give? These sort of kind of petulant questions, and then these fleeting moments like snow falling in New York City, and then turning into little black mountains. Like things spoiling and whatnot. But I guess what I'm really getting at is when you feel away from reality, time takes on this really strange feeling, like it isn't really happening in a way. And so then it made me think, which is the perspective I wrote the song from and why I ended up producing it the way it is, in this hypnotic way of like, well, in those moments, is time longer? What is going on? If my experience of it is longer, it's a little bit like pain, right? Like pain is a real thing, but it's based on our experience of it. And so I wrote it from this place of wondering if in these sort of dissociative, sad, poetic moments, do I actually feel like I'm sort of stopping time in a way in the context of my own life? There isn't some like God complex about the world. I think that we have like the ability to stop time in our own life, to sort of just distance. And that's the entire place I wrote the song from. And it's interesting that you guys asked me to do this because the concept of time is more important to the song than anything I'm talking about. The actual themes I'm talking about are much more just like general thoughts of like sadness or disassociation. But really the point of the song is floating in time, and that kind of last bit, thinking that the world sees your ship. I like the ocean when I think about time, because it feels like it can like move fast or slow. It's a good imagery for me. So I just thought about how much your emotions fuck with time.
So, and it's destabilizing in a way. Yes.
Well, it's kind of always, it's like the metronome of time is like, like no one's ever like, I was doing this and then all of a sudden it was this time and holy shit, that felt great. Everyone's like, what? Like my mom got really high once and did a puzzle. And then at like 9 or 10 p.m. or whatever the story goes, then she says that all of a sudden her neck started to hurt and it was like 3 a.m. That's the scary experience.
Yeah.
And I think what's frightening about that is we're all going to die and we all have so much time. So when you feel that time isn't whoever laughed at that is...
That escalated pretty quick, Jack.
You're like, no, we're not. Okay. So I think there's an inherent immediate reaction to time moving out of sync with how we know time is supposed to move, which is based on seconds, right? Milliseconds, seconds, minutes, days, whatever. To think that you hadn't had your finger on the pulse or you missed something or something got messed up and you're not present. I think it's the root of all panic, sadness, depression is really feeling not present. You're not experiencing your own life. It's my definition of it, right? So any time that you miss time or time moves too fast or time moves too slow, basically anytime you're out of sync with what is defined as time based on the clock and the ticking of it is, for me, a very destabilizing experience.
Yeah.
Not an enjoyable one, even though a lot of good things come from it.
Sure. So, David, what do you make of all this?
Well, this is fantastic. And actually, a lot of what Jack was saying reminded me
Am I
of...
going to be okay, David? Have you seen this before?
You're going to be just fine. It's certainly you're sailing at a B+ at least, and it's going to get better.
Okay, thank you.
Right, yeah, but actually it's an A+, and here's why. Because a lot of what you're saying made me think of a remark that Albert Einstein made about 100 years ago. Einstein became really just a remarkable world-famous celebrity about 100 years ago because of his work on relativity. We'll talk a bit more about soon. And then he and his assistant got flooded, maybe this is familiar to you as well, with requests to explain like this really complicated stuff as simply as he could. And he got really kind of annoyed by that. So he finally came up with an expression that he thought would encapsulate this. And it sounds a lot like what you were saying just a minute ago, Jack. So Einstein said, and this was reported all over the place at the time, he said, if you're sitting with someone you love, and you sit with them for an hour, it can seem to pass in just a minute. And then if you're sitting on a hot stove for a minute, of course, it can feel like an hour, right? Yeah. He says that's relativity. And it's not quite relativity, but the idea that we're going to experiencing things that can seem to take a long time or a short time, and that has to do with our state in the world, and not only about what the clock is saying on the wall, just like you were saying. And so anyway, that resonated with me when you brought that up. I think the biggest shift with relativity, which was introduced, again, roughly 100 years ago, we haven't had this idea for forever. This is something that, a few generations back was brand new, and I find that kind of startling. And the idea is that until that time, we used to be able to at least construct our ideas about the world, how do we build bridges, how do we imagine how the stars move and all that, by assuming that both space and time were fixed. They were just completely rigid. They were a stage on which all the interesting stuff would happen. You have a fixed stage, and then you hire the players and write the script and have props and all that. And the biggest shift with relativity was that space and time are players as well, that they bend, they warp, they respond, they change from place to place, they change over time. And so the elements that you used to think were held fixed, they're also in the mix as well. And so the upshot from the point of view of relativity is that we can think of ourselves as each carrying a personal clock. And we zig and zag and move through space and move through time. And our clock's not going to read the same as someone else's clock. It's going to depend on how we've been moving and where we've been.
What you're saying makes me realize that most time when you talk about time, space, people are so like obnoxiously triggered that their opinion of it could be in question,
right,
that they get very annoyed. And then, but it really is quite like many other things that don't have to do with other people, like pain, right? Or joy is up to the person deciding. But time becomes this collective thing when, if you talk to other people, it really isn't.
That's right. And so I agree. And the hardest part then is calibrating or checking. My clock says this, yours something else. Why? what Einstein showed, it surprised a lot of people. It's not that you're right and I'm wrong or vice versa. We have our personal clocks. We're on different journeys. We interact, we can exchange messages, we can do all kinds of stuff. We can say, oh, my clock is different from yours, let's dig into that. But it's not your clock says 12 noon, you're wrong, right? That we no longer can appeal to that because time is going to be pinned to each of us as we're moving along.
Yeah, there's this really obnoxious video I got on Instagram that I bet a lot of people have seen where it's this guy being like, I have 3 days in one day, 6 a.m. to noon, one day, noon to 5, day 2, 5 to 12, 3 to, you stack that over a year. You've seen this video?
Is it like an optimization?
He's like a guy who like...
It sounds like a Red Bull salesperson.
Yeah, who's like selling like an optimization of life. And as much as you want to like kill him, like there's... it's an interesting point where I got it the other day again. I guess I needed it again, but I was thinking about when I'm in process, like making things versus when I'm on tour, which is a much slower existence. And it sort of seems like almost nothing besides the show can happen in one day. And how there is this sort of truth to like what you do and how you do it does like bend your experience of time in a way where I think like around coffee people can talk about it like, oh man, I just sat on the couch for a month, can't believe you did that, but won't get into it in terms of the real implications of the different experience that people are having with time.
Yeah. And there's another part of this from the point of view of relativity is our clocks will shift based on where we've been, not just what we've been doing. So this part was really kind of mind-boggling for a lot, it still is for a lot of people, including me, that if you're near a really large mass, if you go right up close to the sun, which I don't recommend, but you can do, right? If you send a robot there, their clock will actually tick measurably differently than ours back home, even their identical clocks. And of course, it becomes extreme if you go not just near the sun, but if you push it to a black hole or some extreme sort of exotic region of space.
So the timing in something like Interstellar might not be perfect, but is speaking to a truth.
I was just going to bring up this film. Exactly right, and I think we're going to get a nice illustration of a black hole here. Yeah. So you.
This is a black hole.
It's coming.
Okay. So this is
stay
space.
Seated. I was asked to clarify, this is an artist's rendition, but it's actually, I think, remarkably accurate.
That's the black hole.
That is the black hole. So don't get too close, but we can admire it from the safety of our seats. Yeah, and you see it's going to start other matter whipping around it, and the matter outside the black hole gets sped up, it gets excited, it emits light. The light's not coming from the black hole itself, because nothing can get back out once it falls in. The light we see is from just outside, because that's where the effect is most violent, most extreme. It's going to whip around this sort of star. You can see this bright thing coming around for another visit.
So the light is the collection of all of the lit material that's just accumulating around the edge.
That's
there?
exactly right. There's a lot of ordinary material, gas, and it gets...
How do black holes not just eat everything, though?
Good.
If they're...
The swirling was important to that. So if you just drop a marble or a friend you want to get rid of, but let's stick with a marble, and just going to give them a kick straight toward the black hole, they're going in, and they're never coming out again. However, like with that swirling gas, if you give them a kick sideways, they have a little speed going not straight toward the black hole, then you can have these orbits that don't go all the way into the black hole. You can actually be stuck there, and then, like in Interstellar, like in that great film. And so those folks don't fall in the black hole. They're close enough. Their clocks are getting really warped. Their clock is so different at a rate than the colleagues on the ship further away. And yet they don't get sucked in. They're moving kind of sideways. They have what we would call angular momentum.
So a black hole isn't eating everything.
It's eating a bunch,
but the suction isn't that crazy.
That's right. And you can get stable orbits. You can stay near it but not fall in if you have a little of that sideways
Have we had
motion.
anything that in that orbit?
We can track.
Humans? We've like sent anything that lives in that space around it?
We haven't sent things yet that I know of, at least. I don't think we've sent anything because it's pretty far. The closest one that we know of is at the center of our galaxy, and that's still really far away from us. But what astronomers can do, and people got the Nobel Prize for this, with really, really powerful telescopes, is watch, like in that animation, bright stars nearby get whipped around, and they can watch those for decades, these teams. And so literally over about 20 or more years, 25 years by now, these teams have watched the motion of the visible objects as they get whipped around by that black hole.
How would we know if we weren't already on the other side or inside of a black hole?
We might be.
Yeah.
We might be.
You know, I didn't go to college.
It's not too late. I'll set you up. But
and I do want to add to the conversation, which is a slight aside, that my parents went to college in Boston. but they didn't go here. They went to BU. But my mother was arrested for breaking into the MIT tennis bubble.
I'll make a few calls.
And it was drug induced, and we'd like to have it scrubbed from the record.
It's like tennis and crosswords, no go for your mom.
Yeah.
But I will say this. And I'm bringing it back for what we're talking about here. Okay, her high in 1970 or whatever, breaking into the MIT tennis bubble, is a lot closer to what we're experiencing now than you'd think. For me,
Say more.
I imagine she broke into the tennis bubble. I imagine time was elastic, and I imagine she looked up. Is the bubble still there?
Yes.
And I just imagine, I think this is why people enjoy drugs and why I don't enjoy drugs. And I actually noticed this, ironically, I'll get away from my mom for a sec, speak more to what I do, but like most people who write music, in my experience, do very few drugs that I've met.
Is it a sharpness? You need a clarity, you think? Why do you think that is?
I don't think it's that. I think it's got to do with time. I think it's because I think the people I know who do the most drugs are the ones who are, let me put this in a less like crass, funny way. The people who are interested in bending their minds around time and space are the ones that I see in a more of a scheduled lifestyle where those things would be fun to bend because you can drop right back in. Where ironically people think artists and musicians mind bending, and maybe this all just started out of one moment in the 60s, but everyone I know who works in the studio a lot and is making songs and productions and what almost has a specific terror about going any further outside of time, because on a daily basis, maybe I'll be playing something on the drums and I'll be like, whoa, that was 10 minutes, that felt like 1 minute, or all of a sudden it's 2 a.m. in the studio, or all of a sudden you've been making the sound forever and you want to blow your brains out. You can't do it. The time is already so elastic in there, especially when you're in one space where time is funny.
Would you describe that as being in the flow? Is that a word you or your
Yeah, but it's funny because it's also somewhat terrifying, which I think speaks to a lot of what you've been saying. Like, I think it's these moments of losing yourself. Like, do you ever do something and you sort of forget to breathe? You ever had that experience?
Yeah.
I think that's a really weird one. And I think it's similar to what I'm talking about, where I think the quote unquote flow is a nice place.
Yeah.
I would consider the flow to be a place where you're doing the thing you want to be doing and you don't feel like you're making work. Right. Like you don't feel like you're working, you're enjoying, right?
You don't hear the clocks ticking.
Yeah.
Right, you're right, yeah.
And then the space beyond that is, I think, that sort of forget to breathe. Where was I? How much time has passed? And I think that is the place that maybe because a lot of what you're talking about isn't discussed is terrifying, because the concept of your own definition of time is not a safe one, but maybe it should be.
Yeah, it may be safer at least. Right.
Well, I've heard theoretical physicists talk about getting in that flow state because what you do is extremely creative. So I'd be curious to know, like, how do people stumble upon these great ideas? I mean, Jack sort of hinted at a multiverse earlier, and I know that that's what people are talking about a lot. And these things, wormholes that exist in the theoretical, like, can you paint a picture of what that's like for a theoretical physicist who is working on it? Is it all at a chalkboard? What is that creative process like?
Yeah, so good. So there's a joke I love telling. The best thing about being a theoretical physicist as your job is you can lie down on the couch and close your eyes and no one can tell if you're working or not. And that's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Actually, what I like best, maybe this is similar, Jack, to what you were saying, is there's actually a very kind of disciplined, there's a kind of a logical development. It really has to follow, the mathematics, for example. We can't just make things up. And that's somehow combined with some really strange sounding kind of counterintuitive ideas. And somehow it's playing in that back and forth, or in that mix, somewhere in the space between. So I get emails many per day. I've disproven Einstein. I have a new theory of quantum mechanics. Mostly these days it says quantum.
I have a neighbor who wrote a book, or someone, father of someone I grew up with, wrote a book alleging inaccuracies in Einstein's theory.
Yep, and they're in exceptionally good company. I'm skeptical. I won't say I was wrong because I haven't read
Have
the
you
book.
read anything interesting?
Yes.
In that department, really?
In that department, and it's usually not paying off the way the authors had hoped. And that's not to make fun of it. It's subtle stuff. That's why we go to school for a long time. I don't consider that a kind of moral failing. Like, it's, first of all, it's cool. Thank goodness they're interested in it. Like, that's great. And it's hard, right? And that's why we have a community. Even Einstein wasn't actually alone working this stuff out, right? He needed to bounce ideas off people. We all do. And so it's that mix. And so the emails I tend to get, maybe like from your neighbor, are like, I've proven quantum mechanics is a government conspiracy. That one comes up a lot too. And you read, 2 more lines, like, oh, okay. Because it's usually it's missing that kind of disciplined kind of skeleton or scaffold.
This is very similar to music.
Yeah.
Dovetails like perfectly into the AI conversation with art, which to me is an utter bore. It's a little bit like it just tells you when something is or when it isn't. So to your point about sitting around and thinking and there needing to be layers to it, it's a lot like a song. Like there's just tons of songs. Anyone could write a song. Anyone could write a song. Anyone here could write a song. And the difference between any song and a song that feels really important or special, so tangible even though it's not. And it just tells that story over and over and over again. And there's a reason why even now that we have access to all this music, once again, you could call it, conspiracy this way or that way, and there's a lot of problems with the algorithm, and yet some kid somewhere can still write a song that lots of people can identify as, oh, there's something really special in that. There was this annoying art documentary, and this person was talking about painting. I think it was it Rothko? There were all the fakes of? Yeah. I forget. It was about that, but the way she described brilliance was at once really annoying, but really spoke to me. She was just like, when something's brilliant, it just tells you, which is such an easy thing to say, and it would be so easy to discredit that, but it's kind of true. This is my point about AI. The knowledge that someone made something and that it's brilliant is exactly what interests people in work, whether it's art or what you do, right? It's the same reason why people go all over the world to see a Picasso, but don't care if you have a printout in your home. And I think that's the second you remove that from it, it becomes incredibly uninteresting. Little off topic, but it makes me think of the person who, discredits it in a thought versus just the layers of, it's like my friends, I won't put myself into it, but people I know have done this forever. When they write a simple song, you feel every song they've ever written through it.
And I think maybe for that reason, a lot of physicists will adopt aesthetic language, like from the arts, say, oh, that's, they'll talk about a beautiful equation because it's somehow not just what the robots would spit out. It's not just a workaday. You're not only following the rules, but you can retrace it because there are rules, right? So it's not just a mishmash. There's a spark you'll hear about. And so they'll often turn to a kind of artistic language, even though it's equations on a whiteboard or a blackboard.
Well, speaking of, and I had no intention of bringing this up today, but one concept which is so resonant with music is the string theory concept. So can you give us a little primer on what that is?
Well, I can try, sure. So the idea in brief, this is an 8-hour podcast, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. No,
Get comfy.
So the idea in brief, we have 2 really quite amazing pillars with which we try to make sense of the world in physics. There's quantum theory, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about, and there's relativity, the warping of space and time. They really don't play well together at all. In fact, no one for 100 years has found a way to get one self-consistent description of the world by using those 2 really key ingredients. And that keeps my colleagues up, literally all night to this day. So one candidate for that is a thing called string theory, superstring theory. And the idea is that instead of imagining that you have some kind of sheet, a kind of fabric of space and time, you can imagine I think often about a trampoline, just kind of stretched out there, and you have discrete matter kind of plopped on. What if both those things, what if the space-time and the objects you consider to be matter are all vibrations of very specific little strings on impossibly small length scales? We would never see them with the best microscopes, impossibly tiny, much smaller than elementary particles. And so it's really all about essentially vibrations of this kind of underlying stuff. Now, is that right? No one knows if it's right. One could write down impressive-looking equations to try to make sense of things. It looks like maybe there's a hint this would let you have quantum theory play okay with relativity. It's not done. It's not a finished, kind of symphony. But the idea is to say that there's these kind of, instead of thinking about like little marbles or billiard balls, you just shrink down your head, oh, that's what an electron's like. It's like a little, baseball shrunk down. Well, it's not, right? Even in ordinary quantum theory, there's these sort of wave-like features even of what looks like we think of as solid matter. And string theory kind of takes that, if you like, to an extreme. Everything is about these sort of vibrations of these one-dimensional objects, not
one-dimensional.
A string, like a line, right? So it has length but not width.
But it's matter.
Matter comes from the vibrations of these things. Yeah. And ultimately is the hope, so does the emergence of space and time.
Do you personally believe in string theory?
I believe that my friends have fun pursuing it.
Okay. I have a question.
Yeah.
When you have students or just people in your field, do they go through some sort of journey of incredibly interested, optimistic, learn a ton about this and become nihilists? And then do they come back to a very simple state of joy? Because the more I get into this, the more I flirt with a mix of nothing matters, therefore everything matters, and back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and
is there a joke in your system about people going to that place and then coming?
Honestly, what I try to do, because it is very common, and it's not usually over a span of years. I can see this happen with myself and with colleagues sort of day by day. You're stuck in this couch, and it's the most brilliant thing in the universe. This is going to show Stephen Hawking was blah, blah, and then the next day, oh, it all fell apart. It's trivial. Everyone knows it. The next day, oh, but look at this new thing. It can be a cycle of days, let alone months.
It's so similar to the studio.
I would bet.
We did it. You come back the next morning and you're like, we didn't.
The best thing since the White Album.
It's always a mountain.
Yeah. And so what I try to do, honestly, is say to, especially the younger folks I'm very lucky to work with, saying, what you're feeling is real, it's authentic, and it's not only on you. I don't want to say it's normal, like you should just not care, but we go through that. That's part of this process. And the fact that you're going through it means you're actually kind of doing it right? You're invested, you're thinking about it. And you're coming back to it with this mixture of discipline and a kind of creativity. So, but the highs and lows, it's brilliant, it's stupid, it's brilliant, it's stupid. That's very familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, very similar to being in the studio.
What we're talking about is time itself may just be an illusion. Yeah. Yes? So does that destabilize you, or does it make you more present?
Yeah, I wish it were the latter. I mean, that would be nice. Yeah. I honestly wish it were that. Like probably most of us here, I get caught up with the alarm goes off and I have a meeting at 2 and all the usual kind of stuff. So I don't think I'm very well practiced at using this insight.
Have you had periods in your life where your work has led you to not care?
I've had the opposite. I've had the euphoria.
Okay.
Thankfully, without the kind of nihilist side for myself. There were moments where it's been just a nonstop joyride. And honestly, partly it's because of the intellectual adventure. Maybe that could be like the song, you just know you got the song. For me, it's often also because of this amazing circle I get to work with. And where no one's doing this alone.
I mean, it's really community. For all the Blue Zone documentaries we get obsessed with, the one connecting point is community.
It is.
It really is.
And maybe it's not quite the same, Jack, I'd be curious in your world. But for us, we kind of have a built-in community. Like, it's my job to work with younger people, and it's fantastic. Undergraduates, graduate students, postdocs, much more senior colleagues.
I'm lucky because I'm in different sides of it, but if you have a band, you have a community. Mm-hmm. If you're a solo artist, I feel like you can drift further into that. You don't have that community in the same way. I notice differences, good and bad, between people who have their sort of built-in community on the stage and people who it's really just them. The studio is a real community. Mm-hmm. Small community all working towards this one thing is really, especially in this moment in time, remarkably more important than ever, because as it gets lost, and I think that's why a lot of people struggle with the reason to exist right now, because it's just gotten so big that really, and which is funny because my music has reached a lot of people, but whether it's on tour or in the studio, the aspects of my life which are really make me want to keep existing are just me with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 other people just doing one thing, and that's it. Like today's a special day on tour. I mean, this is separate, but normally it's like the whole day is just we have one thing to do. We're all literally moving towards one thing, literally. And if we do that one thing, then we were successful that day. In my experience, I'm not very old, but it is sort of the pinnacle of happiness. And yeah, I'd be worried about being one of your students now because there's such a demand to be explosively huge. Whereas I feel like, if the first, 100, you said it was 100 years since Einstein's theory.
Yeah, that's right.
It probably, for the first 80 of those years, it was we had Einstein and this, and then a bunch of other people are fighting the good fight. And now I imagine, because I see it in all fields, the outsized nature of what you'd have to accomplish to make your mark feels designed to destroy.
To cut through the noise, is it?
Yeah. Hey, you look like you want to move on, but I have one other time question. That's one other thing. So I feel like we talk a lot about time moving in different directions, different experiences, blah, blah, blah. Is there anything that is being worked on about pulling back in time with certain things? Like I almost wonder in medicine, like I can almost imagine a future where it's like they take a certain amount of cells and go back and like you have the thing in your arm, we're going to localize this area and pull it back in time.
Yeah.
Is this
so I
in
don't,
the conversation?
I'm sure it's in other people's conversations. And I don't do the medicine stuff, but in this abstract physics stuff, like that swirling black hole, there's some really creative work that suggests that one might be able to construct a backwards in time machine. But based on what we understand of relativity, which is that we rely on it every day in ways we can talk about in a moment. It sounds so obscure, and yet it really matters. It got most of us here to the museum today with GPS. And we can also push it to the extremes, like that amazing illustration of the black hole. Something like a black hole has such an extreme impact on our clocks, like in Interstellar, right? There's one more thing you can add in called a wormhole, which is only hypothetical.
What is a wormhole?
Yeah, so
I've heard it, but I actually don't know.
It's an idea which has not been proven yet. We know black holes are real. Wormholes are a cool idea, a hypothesis still, but they follow within the logic of relativity. It would basically be a shortcut from here to there. Okay. So instead of imagining, I said before, this kind of smooth trampoline, what if the trampoline had a kind of, like a shortcut to get from here to there?
Has there been anything that has even remotely, even in some way, proven the existence of that? Has anything happened that in your world people are like, this is why we believe this, or is it strictly on a board at this point?
At this point, it's on a board, or let's say computer simulations. That's right. But the idea would be with such a structure which doesn't look like it's ruled out. We're often saying, not is that likely, is it impossible? And it could be very rare, but still could happen. And this, I think, is in that bucket, certainly not proven. And the idea would be if space-time has a more complicated structure, more like kind of a Swiss cheese, you can kind of flow through, then in principle, there could be what we call closed time-like curves. You could start here and end up there earlier, not just different point in space, but a different, in fact, an earlier point in time. Maybe. Now, that would require some other kind of matter would have to behave in an unusual way, maybe not impossible, but unusual. So we're not building them in our backyard yet. But as a series of equations and computer simulations, it looks like there's real models of that.
Interesting.
So I'm on the hook for having told these people that you could explain what it would take for time to stop and help validate Jack's lyrics. So
I call it a notion, by the way.
Right, okay.
So
notions are nothing to be messed with.
I think so too, but I'm just saying you got this notion that time's going to stop.
Right. So here's my notion. Is one way is, let's bring back our favorite black hole. I love these things. So the clock that I'm carrying, if I'm near a black hole, is getting slowed down much more compared to a clock that you all might be holding here in the Museum of Science. And we know the rate at which it should differ. The longer I spend near that black hole, the more off our clocks are going to be. You would see everything about me and my clock slowing down.
I age faster than you when you are.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly right. Which again, the movie Interstellar, I think, shows really
Murph.
Exactly.
Nice.
That's right. That's
nice
right.
reference.
Yeah. Now remember, I was saying before, those folks didn't go into the black hole. They were moving around it, orbiting it, but it was close enough their clocks were affected. If we try to watch someone actually fall into the black hole, we watch their clock stop. It would actually reach an infinite mismatch between what we see and what they see. Now, it's important to say their personal clock didn't stop. They fall in. They didn't hit a brick wall. They didn't bump their head. They fall in a black hole. You'll never hear from them again. You'll never see them again. You'll never get another report from them. And the last report you get will take an infinite amount of time to reach you. So we lose the ability to track what happens to them or anything else that falls in. And again, this is the notion from relativity.
Is there any studies about death in black holes, and if there is any correlation of in our own kind of, there are tiny black holes everywhere?
So that second part, I guess
what I mean is like if I'm thinking about a black hole as like a thing over there, right? Mm-hmm. Who's to say that there aren't sort of black holes that souls go into?
There might be, and
because what you're describing sounds a lot like the dispatches of someone being here or not.
I think you're right, and the bigger challenge would be how would we know? Which is to say, I can't disprove that, but I also can't give you evidence that it's right? Because the black hole just becomes this ultimate shroud behind which we have no information. Now, there are ideas, again, from very prominent, very accomplished theoretical physicists. Could black holes actually be kind of passages to a different universe? They might be. Well, I don't know, right? But there's a way in which a black hole to us might actually be opening up in some sense on the other side. And so are there many universes? This is a portal to them. And it's not only science fiction, it's really good for science fiction. But the idea, could a black hole be more like a wormhole in that sense? Could that be a shortcut to somewhere else you didn't even know there was? And so it's, people can write cool papers about it. We don't have, we can't do experiments
but I guess
on
the
that.
knowledge that you can never or yet know what happens in there presents anything on the table.
That's right. So it's hard to rule it in, but we can't rule it out.
Yeah. If anything, you could just start over.
Yep. Now, something else you said that I do really love, and I'm a lot of fun thinking about with my colleagues, is that there might be tons of very tiny black holes everywhere. Don't get worried, they won't harm us, but they could be not just these swirling things in distant galaxies, but they could be all of what we call dark matter. We could be awash in this, and that could be what's actually helping galaxies move the way they do, helping matter cluster.
Yeah, I think a lot about this. Is a really weird person to evoke, but Donald Rumsfeld has these. He has the known known,
that's
the
right.
known unknown, the unknown known, and the unknown unknown.
That's right.
You know this?
I didn't.
Okay, so
I did not see that name coming up
it's
today.
worth seeing because it's an Errol Morris documentary, and he's obviously a complicated figure. But it sounds like what you're talking about is the unknown unknown. So the known known are things you know. The known unknown are things you don't know.
Like
right?
what's inside a black hole.
Exactly.
I know I don't know
we don't know what's in a black hole. The unknown known are things you don't know that you know. Things that you discover. It happens all the time, big ways or small ways. The most terrifying, and Donald Rumsfeld is talking about the war in Iraq, but I think it's really interesting for this, is the unknown unknown. The things that you don't know that you don't know. This is what makes me think that when you talk about dark matter, that whether it's a lost thought, a dead person, a this or that, the amount of things that are gone that we don't even know are gone, where do they go? And it makes me think of the tiny black holes like ticks everywhere.
Yeah.
David Byrne brought up this exact point last month in
Really?
this very building. Yes.
Oh, cool.
And he was talking about eels. That's a link I can't follow.
You guys
But
both went there.
did he reference Rumsfeld?
No, he did not.
But I think this unknown unknown keeps me up at night because we can muse on what we don't know we know. That's kind of fun or scary, what could come up in therapy or whatever. Yeah. What we know we don't know is the most comforting, right? I don't know quantum physics.
Right.
And then I can move on with my life and choose to learn or not.
Right.
Known known's boring, but unknown unknown.
Yeah.
Speaking of, we've got 2 minutes before Q&A, and we got to hit quantum mechanics.
All right, we'll do it
120
fast.
seconds to explain quantum mechanics.
This is an amazing ride.
Speed round.
This is what made Einstein so mad.
It's actually true. Einstein was a huge critic of quantum theory. Exactly right.
Or let me give you some helpful parameters.
Yeah.
Can we talk about time as it concerns quantum mechanics?
We can. And so one of the reasons why quantum theory doesn't play well with relativity is they actually seem to assume different things about time, and it's hard to make those compatible. It shows up even just within the realm of quantum theory itself. One of my favorite topics, my absolute favorite topic, is something called quantum entanglement. I would just talk for more than 2 minutes, believe me about that. I won't now. But one of the things that's most strange is what Einstein actually called spooky action at a distance. He hated this. He really,
Spooky action?
at a distance. Huh. And it kept him up at night. His hair, it was on end, partly for this, I'm sure. And so the idea is that if you have these two bits of matter that were once interacting, we're talking here, we have some interactions, and then those bits of matter separate an arbitrarily far distance, Andromeda Galaxy, not just like New Jersey, like really far. Their behavior of those two bits of matter are going to stay correlated. Their behavior is going to line up even though they're no longer able to talk with each other. And so there's, in a sense, no passage of time. That made Einstein so uncomfortable. Now, usually we say if something happens here, it should take some time for some signal, some force, something to travel across space at some fast but not infinite speed. It's going to take time to go from A to B. That was bedrock for Einstein for everything else he thought about the world. Quantum entanglement says not necessarily. It could go from A to B in some sense instantly, or at least you find a connectedness between things that have no business being connected. So in fact, time in some sense disappears when we try to analyze something like quantum entanglement. And that I just love that. I think about it all the time.
And so what does it take to entangle two particles? So I hear it usually explained as light particles, right? So if you're shining light and you break that down to particles, how do you know which particles are entangled?
Good. So in fact, it can be done with many, many kinds of matter, typically done with particles of light. You're right. In some sense, because those are easiest for our colleagues to do in the lab now, not because they're somehow special, they're easiest. But so for that, I was able to do some really cool experiments with some great colleagues. You shine a laser, a very what's called a pump laser, very bright laser in a pulse. You shine it into a little bit of kind of nondescript plastic, like that big. And that takes in light of a particular color, particular frequency, beats per minute, and it splits it into two. It conserves energy. The amount of energy coming out equals the amount going in. It's not breaking.
Let's hit on that again. So
Yeah.
light and sound all working with the same form of measurement, right?
They're all waves. We can think of them at least in terms of waves, and therefore beats per minute, frequency, that a wavelength. That's right. And so you shine this very carefully selected light from a laser onto this piece of plastic, essentially, a nonlinear crystal, and it spits out pairs of photons, and their properties have to kind of be lined up. They're almost like twins being born together. As an analogy that often comes up. And then you can send those twins on their way out into the world. So imagine they go off, and let's imagine, even harder to imagine, you take away their cell phones. Now it's a horror story, right? Now they can't just text each other all the time. I won't say it's true of human twins, but with these entangled particles, what you choose to do to one particle here has an impact on what you're going to measure on its partner, even if it's galaxies away. Not waiting for a status update or a tweet, right, to travel through space and time. So that's a notion that, again, that Einstein found just too strange to be true. He said that disproves quantum theory. Now we use it all the time. Now it's like off-the-shelf technology 100 years later. So that's an example where time doesn't play by the rules that we might expect when we enter quantum theory.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're about to go to Q&A. Anything else you want to ask, Jack?
Well, no, that just made me think of, though, that something happening versus light or sound, because like if we play a show, you make sound is so slow that you can hear the slowness, right? Like if I say this back in those seats, I hear it slower, but the space of when something happens, it happened at the same time. That kind of drives me a little crazy. Yeah, something happens at the same time, but then the major things that we sense, which would be light, sound. I don't know much about the speed of smell. I assume it's the slowest, but is when you can literally feel the slowness of that, but know the knowledge that it happened at the same time, is something that I both quite literally understand and also tweaks me out.
It was exactly those kinds of questions that set a very young Albert Einstein, age of 26 at the time, on his road to special relativity. Something happens here now. It's not just something that happened here. You have to say it happened here now, an event, and then you have to ask, how would I have measured it or compared my notes there then?
Yeah, well, ironically, all the examples in my head, which I think come to our original point, are about mortality. Because the way I keep thinking is that, like, if your heart stops here, you're gone. And it happened at the same time that on the megaphone, they're like, so-and-so's dead. And then if they get that an hour later because of the speed of sound, or 30 seconds later, at the same time that your heart stopped is the same time it stopped there, regardless of all those. But this is where I'm not going anywhere interesting with this other than the fact that for me and maybe other people, all concepts of time are immediately linked to mortality. And are immediately linked to how much you do or don't have of it, and how you are experiencing it in relationship to yourself and your community. And I think all bad thoughts come from a dissonance with that.
I think that's exactly what drove the movie Interstellar. We can bring it back one more time, right? It's not just that my clock doesn't match your clock. That's not the stuff of great drama. But it's characters seeing, not seeing their children.
His daughter's life.
Right. And so I'm not just mildly out of sync with the people I care about. I'm existing in a different time, and I can never reconnect, right? Yeah. The mortality, or at least the passage that you can't recover. And so, as you might know, that movie was sort of launched by a fantastic colleague, a Nobel laureate in theoretical physics named Kip Thorne, who's an expert in relativity. And he said, what if we made this notion of the clocks don't have to agree into a major plot point? Let's make it a human scale. He had to do that with black holes and spaceships, but let's make it
I like that, though, that the concept of I don't know if this is what you mean, but that playing with time or a black hole is why the book falls off the shelf, or is why something that feels vaguely strange happen, or when the wind blows, it's these like echoes of other moments in time.
That's right. And he brings it to a human scale and a personal scale relationships, right? It's not only in equations on a blackboard anymore. Yeah.
Okay. So this one is from Emma. this is for both of you, I guess. Do you have any thoughts on the notion of healing frequencies or other natural frequencies found in the earth and how they may connect to rhythms found within quantum observation and the healing properties of music, fostering connection to each other and the natural world?
You should take this, and the only thing I'll say about it is that my relationship to frequencies is so like guttural. Like there's the ones that I can't hear, they drive me crazy, and then there's the ones that I'm drawn to, and I'm simply like a caveman piecing together the ones that I love. So it's just like a completely visceral experience.
So it's an interesting question, and I'm by no means an expert on this. Some of the folks I wrote about in a book that Matt had mentioned were very invested in this idea. So I mean, I read up on it rather than being an expert myself. Personally, I don't know of any examples that I can point to and say, oh, that's exactly the effect that Emma's asking about. One of the challenges, I'm not going to say it's impossible, one of the challenges is that when we put lots and lots of quantum particles together to make a person, a gajillion particles, right? A lot of these very special quantum properties, most of them get washed out. So entanglement becomes a metaphor for people. It's a statement of existence for particles, for individual or small pairs of particles. So a lot of the challenge is keeping these kind of special quantum coherences, this special connectedness from getting washed out, because it's actually a fairly fragile phenomenon, at least when we're talking about forms of matter. So if we have all kinds of stuff, we're basically just really noisy. Like we're literally noisy. And we have lots and lots of frequencies going on all the time. We're just, like kind of static at the level of the kind of quantum signal, let's say. So I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm saying I'm skeptical without being an expert on it.
Okay. If you wrote a song, this is from Anonymous, if you wrote a song and it went through the black hole, what speed would it start at and what speed would the song end at?
I think we've all learned that we wouldn't know the end speed.
Good. In fact,
I think we've all
end.
learned that we would potentially only know the speed until we got up close, and then it turned into an infinite dispatch of bullshit.
If I'm listening on my Sony Walkman, which is my preferred, right? If I got my old, right, vintage stuff, and I'm the one who's falling into the black hole, first of all, saying my goodbyes now, I'm not coming back, I won't notice any difference. If I'm taking the song with me, I hear it the same all the way through. If you've patched into the signal and you're listening along with me, we're grooving in sync when I'm close by, and then when we notice this huge, ultimately an infinite mismatch. So it depends on who's carrying the song.
Is it a slow, like is there a point in space where you can measure time is going off and then more and more, or is it like once you hit the zone of the black hole, it becomes this unmeasurable infinite space?
Exactly the second. That's right.
So it's not like sound traveling where it's like, hey, when I'm this far away, time is this. It's more like...
Right. And in this case, why? So here's an extra cheat, because if we're listening to it through space, there's no air, there's not actually going to be sound waves. We're going to be listening through light waves, right? Or like radio, right? Yeah. And those are going to be warped unavoidably by space and time, even without an atmosphere there. The sound waves depend on their medium.
Interesting.
And light's somehow special.
Who asked the question? Anonymous?
That was anonymous. Okay, but this is our last one from Emily. Some of your songs are very evocative of a specific time of day and the feelings we have at those times. For example, Wake Me and Good Morning. I just really outed myself as being totally ignorant. Do you find you come up with the ideas for these time-specific songs during the corresponding time of day?
Well, Wake Me is not about morning, but go on.
Okay. Do you find you come up with the ideas for these time-specific songs during the corresponding time of day, or is it asynchronous?
Well, I'm going to pivot because I think what I got from that question is how much time means to me with that, where I'm not even thinking about it. The song Wake Me is all about making sure you're alert when something important is happening, making sure that you're not feeling time slow or fast. Present, right? Present. Everyone talks about being present. It's the most important thing, as we've defined. If it feels like that's the highest form of existence, is to be present. Good morning, the first line is woke up, I'm in the in-between. That's a snippet.
It's like the hook just
the in-between, yeah. Which is exactly what we're talking about. So that song I wrote about the space between, which is a very funny time signature, right? The space between dream and awake. And I'm not talking about the literal slowness of it or the grogginess. I'm talking about that. For me, it's like maybe 1 second when you don't know if the dream was reality or, that, but the blurring, right? When you're dreaming, right?
I love that state.
Yeah, I wrote a whole song about it. It's like the dream. Okay, I'm flying here, whatever. I'm awake. Here's my bed. But that space where you're truly in between is so incredibly potent. I wrote about it from the perspective of grief, right? Like, you saw someone, then you remember they're not there. I think most people can relate to this feeling in a breakup. You dream, then you wake up, and then it hits you that this has happened. Sorry, to go back to the question. The answer is I'm not thinking about times of day. I'm thinking about states of being around time. And the dream state is a hugely interesting one for me with time, which goes back to the waiter. There's that line, all these dreams, you wrote them up. I love that because I love this idea that when you're dreaming, you wrote all of it, you directed it, and you're playing with time. You decided at some part of your being that this was going to be a long, interesting dream. We act like it's something that happened to us, but we did it, right? Everyone's like, oh, I dreamt that I was, my grandmother was naked and then I, shot her. And you're like, well, you didn't dream that, you wrote that and with no one else's help. If anything, more intensely than if I just sat here and wrote it because I'm influenced by everyone around me. So not as much times a day, as much states and how time relates to it.
Well, listen, I can't thank you both enough for being here. Can we all please give it up for Jack Antonoff and Dr. David Kaiser? Thank you to the Museum of Science and all of you. Subscribe to the show, get your free merch. Thank you so much. Be sure to check out Bleacher's new album and catch them on tour through fall 2024. For more information, please visit their website, bleachersmusic.com. And David's most recent book, Quantum Legacies, Dispatches from an Uncertain World, is now available in paperback wherever books are sold. Sing for Science is co-produced by Talkhouse and made possible in part by a grant from the Simons Foundation. Our music is by Planetarium. Social media manager is Bailey Constas. Digital producer is Keenan Cush. And location engineers were Andrew Pond, Kaya Pollock, and Daryl Davis. Special thanks to Emily Connick, Michaela Cohen, Frank Wilczek, James Monroe, Tim Ritchie, Remy Frisch, Bethany Zeitz, Riley Mulroy, and Donnie LeBlanc for their help making this episode possible. If you like Sing for Science, the best way you can support us is to give us a review, tell a friend about the show, and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. For more information, go to singforscience.org and follow us on social media @SingForScience. Thanks for listening.